to this webinar on halal opportunities for sheep farmers. It's organized by AHDB to highlight opportunities that exist in the halal market for our sheep farmers in the UK. Now, many of you would have seen the growth of the halal market. It is growing in importance for our sheep farmers and for meat processors. And there are a number of activities that AHDB is involved in order to promote this important market and also the broader conventional market for our sheep farmers, our processors. In the domestic front, we have a number of activities or programs that are aimed at creating awareness or improving our understanding of the halal market. So, for instance, in AHDB, we've managed to get together stakeholders from the halal sector to come together from time to time to discuss the challenges and opportunities in the sector. We also introduced what we call the Halal Stakeholder Farm Visit, which creates a platform for farmers and stakeholders in the halal sector to interact, to share ideas on how to drive the market forward. One of these visits or interactions or platforms is what we're doing tonight, focus on highlighting the opportunities that exist for farmers. There are other activities that we have within AHDB that are aimed at developing the market and also making sure we realize the benefits that the market presents. From the export front, we've got a number of market access activities. We know that we're working very tirelessly to open the market to the sheep market in the USA. It's a market that we estimate is worth 37 million in the next that is worth 37 million over 5 years. So that is a significant market. There are other markets on our radar which we are working on, including Japan, Thailand, and China. So these are all activities that we're doing here within AHDB. There are also trade development activities. So for instance, for those of you who were with us in Anuga has just ended, and AHDB had a presence there with exporters and processors from the UK just to showcase UK products to the world. We also have Gulf Food, which takes place in the Middle East, in Dubai, which we are planning to attend in February 2022. So if you're interested, if you're a processor interested in attending the Gulf Food, you can get in touch with us and we will be able to facilitate that. We also have, we've also planned a trade mission that will take place later this month, and it will involve taking the major exporters, sheep meat exporters from the UK to meet the major importers in the UAE so that they can interact and try to generate some business through this. So that is just an overview of some of the things we're doing here to promote opportunities for either for the domestic consumption of sheep meat or for export to the growing markets around the world. So I'll now go through some housekeeping slides before we move to the first speaker. In terms of the webinar itself, everyone will be muted. All attendees will be muted throughout the webinar. So if you there will be opportunity to ask questions at the end of the webinar. We will start sharpish at from 7 till 8, and then reserve 15 minutes at the end for people to ask questions. My colleague Martin will assist in reading the questions to us at the end of the webinar. The webinar is also important to note that it will be recorded, and anybody who registered for it, a copy of it will be emailed to them after we have finished with it. Also, at the end, there is a survey. If you can kindly spare some few minutes to complete it for us. Amanda, can I go to the next slide, please? So in terms of questions, this is the process, this is the process you go through to ask a question. There is an arrow which is highlighted there, which you need to click on. That is the orange button or the orange arrow. You need to click on it, and when you click on it, you then have the opportunity with highlighting on the right how you can ask questions. So you just type where it says type a question. Once you finish typing your question, you can then press on send. Magically, my colleague Martin will receive it and read for us to be able to answer it for you. So once again, welcome again. I'm going to introduce the first speaker. The first speaker is Mr. Rizwan Khaled. Rizwan is the Managing Director of Euro Quality Lambs based in Shropshire. Rizwan operates one of the largest halal abattoirs, sheep meat abattoirs in the UK. He is going to take us through opportunities that exist for accessing the Kurbani market. And these opportunities is relevant to farmers and also to processors. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Rizwan to start. Thank you.
Thank you, Awal. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good, excellent. Just getting my slides on here. So hopefully you should be able to see the first slide over here. So good evening, everyone. As Awal has said, my name is Rizwan Khaled. I'm based in Shropshire. So my family, we run Euro Quality Lambs. My parents have been in the industry since the 70s. We've had a site here in Craven Arms since 1992. And our main focus is on export of lamb into the European market. And we're the biggest Muslim-owned lamb slaughterhouse in the UK. So halal is a significant part of our market. So I just want to start off with, and Dr. Gamma will probably touch upon this later on as well. Just before getting into the Kurbani aspect, it's just worth touching upon the UK halal market. So the population of Muslims in the UK is 3.4 million, according to the ONS population survey in 2018, roughly equating to 5% of the UK. It's a very young demographic. So it's more than half, or just under half, were under the age of 25 at the last census, and we'll probably see a shift towards even a younger demographic when we get the new census results out. The cultural heritage does affect the cuisine and consumption habits amongst Muslims. In the UK, it's predominantly South Asian heritage, which means Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Indian. But there are also other heritages from Arab countries, from African countries, and these do have an influence in their buying habits. And AHGB have done a lot of work in the consumer studies, which can be accessed on their website. But in a nutshell, from a consumption perspective, in the absence of alcohol, food, and especially meat, plays a major role in all social functions. We do have a very diverse multicultural community here in the UK, and the AHGB studies have confirmed, which you know, that the primary meats are poultry and sheep meat. So it's estimated that 20-25% of the sheep meat is consumed by the 5% of the population that's Muslim. And if you look at the protein plate for Muslims, it's roughly 55-60% poultry, 30-35% sheep meat, with very little beef and no pork. And it's also worth noting that the demand for halal mutton fundamentally underpins the EU trade. Without the EU trade, will be nowhere. And also touching upon the significant EU halal market. The single market is very critical for UK sheep meat. As we all know, about a third of UK production is exported. And there's a significant Muslim population over there as well. So in France, there's approximately 10%, which is predominantly North African origin. Germany, approximately 6%, about Turkish origin, and you have other countries in there as well. So Europe is also very significant from a halal standpoint. So coming to the topic of tonight's webinar, and just to give you a flavor from a Muslim perspective, what are the target festivals that we look at where we see increased consumption amongst Muslims. while we have Christmas and Easter is the first festivals that may be counterproductive, but actually the bank holidays enable Muslim families and friends to get together. So we do see there being an uptick in halal demand at those times. The key thing to note with the Muslim calendar, Muslim festivals, is that it's linked to the lunar calendar as opposed to the solar calendar. So which means that each month is based on the new moon and is actually the sighting of the new crescent moon. So what that means is that we can predict when that's going to be, but until actually sighted in particular locations, you don't know the exact date. You'll know the date based on calculations 1 or 2 days, 1 or 2 days out. But the lunar calendar, 12 months of the lunar calendar, are basically 10 to 11 days shorter than the solar calendar because each lunar month is only 29 or 30 days compared to the different 30, 31 days in the solar calendar. So this is why the festival timings change during the year. Many of you may be aware of Ramadan, which is a month of fasting, with Eid al-Fitr celebration at the end. I won't touch upon Ramadan in this presentation, but it is a significant month in that when we do open our fast, there's a lot of social gatherings and meat forms a central part of that. That has been impacted the last couple of years because of the pandemic, but we see demand pick up rapidly during Ramadan. And the topic of this presentation, which is Qurbani, the Muslim Thanksgiving, which I will go into detail for now. But the challenges for sheep marketing is the calendar moves back 10 or 11 days. So how does it suit your system that you're producing on your farm? So Qurbani, what is it? And I often refer to Qurbani as the Muslim Thanksgiving. The date for next year is expected to be Saturday, 9th of July, plus or minus 1 day, but it will be plus or minus 1 day. But so you're relatively accurate in terms of the timings. But the key thing to think about is that as a Muslim Thanksgiving, instead of turkeys, it's predominantly lamb and sheep, but it can also be cattle, camels, goats, etc. Not chickens, they're too small, thankfully. Otherwise, we won't have much demand for our product. But it is ruminants and larger animals. That's what's offered at that time. It occurs 2 lunar months and 10 days after the end of Ramadan, and is linked to Hajj, which some people may have heard of, which is the annual pilgrimage to Mecca. And Hajj, the actual whole pilgrimage of Hajj, is all about Prophet Abraham. And this is actually very similar to the Christian and Jewish traditions in that, all of them are Abrahamic religions, in that the story of how Prophet Abraham was asked to slaughter his son, and God replaced his son with a ram. And it's that story that's being reenacted, where Muslims slaughter an animal per person as a thanks to God to commemorate that story. And in the Islamic tradition, also in the Christian and Jewish tradition, it was actually a ram that was replaced. And because it was a ram that was replaced for Prophet Abraham, that's why there's a extra emphasis of ram lambs or ram hoggets at that time. Not a requirement, but there is an extra preference for it. In terms of terminology, Qurbani means sacrifice, as in the sacrifice of Prophet Abraham, peace be upon him, and it's a word in Urdu, but the word in Arabic is called udhiya, and it's Qurban in Turkish. So different cultures will know different words. The key thing is that it's an act of worship, so the eligibility of it has to be done correctly. Where is Qurbani actually performed? So if you look at the migration and the first generation Muslims coming in the country, traditionally they perform their Qurbani in the country of origin. So they would, as they're working, they would send the money to the country of origin and they will carry out the Qurbani over there. What's happened now in my and third generation is that people are still sending Qurbanis in their country of origin, parents' country of origin, but there's more and more is being sent via UK Islamic charities to international countries. But there has been a trend of performing more local Qurbanis amongst the young British Muslims. But when I'm saying about UK Islamic charities, There's a lot. There's 15 there that just to give you an idea of, and they facilitate Qurbanis right across Africa, the subcontinent, Middle East, Palestine, Turkey, all across. There is a lot of options now via the internet for second, third generations to carry out the Qurbani in other parts of the world. And it is cheap, but in some places, for example, if you look at Palestine and Syria, because of the situations over there, the livestock is actually very, very expensive. But it does provide a feel-good factor for those who do donate that Qurbani, because the meat ends up going to the poor. What happens in the market here when we're during the Qurbani period? This is quite important for people to realize, because we do tend to talk about Qurbani period, but actually it's important to know that there's effectively two distinct markets during the Qurbani period. The first is what I call the Eid market, which is the majority, maybe 75 to 80% of the uplift is the Eid market. This is the increased sale of normal halal meat for the celebratory meal on the Eid al-Adha, the Qurbani day. Because most Muslims are performing Qurbani abroad, they still need meat for their celebrations when they eat together as a family on the day of Eid. For this market, there are no eligibility requirements. It's just normal halal requirements, and I'll go into what the eligibility requirements are next. So the rest of the market is the actual Qurbani market, which I estimate about 20-25%. So the Qurbani must be performed during 3 days, certain days which I'll go into. The sale of Qurbani eligible animals and the resulting meat for individual consumers, slaughtered on or after the Qurbani day, and delivered, collected ASAP to individuals. What happens is that in each household now, so if you got parents, 2-3 children, they all want to perform at least one, if not two, Qurbanis locally. So the next generation, the children, understand that it's not just a money donation going abroad and something happening abroad. It's actually an act of worship involving reenacting the story of Abraham, receiving the meat, distributing it amongst the family. And there are large numbers procured in the run-up for Qurbani Day for both markets. So what is the eligibility criteria for Qurbani? So the key one that you may have heard about is the age requirement, which is that it must be a minimum 6 months old. And in next year's situation, that means it must be born before the 9th of January 2022. It has to be sexually mature, but then there are other considerations from a farming perspective, topping of breeding, management and feed, the animal identification assurance. How does that fit in with your farming structure, with new lamb, and when the lambs are sold? Because we know when by the time it's a market in Easter, May time, which is the high prices, Qurbani being in July time, what animals will actually be left for that time at the market. But the age is a very important consideration for eligibility. It needs to be a plumb and healthy animal, i.e. not emaciated, no illnesses, and there needs to be no defects on there, so not lame, no broken teeth, horns, etc. Basically, you're trying to slaughter something that you'll be proud of when you're slaughtering for God. And there are subsegments or consumer demand for additional non-core criteria. So this is not a core criteria for the eligibility, but there is a demand for them. The rams I mentioned before because of the story of Prophet Abraham, but also those animals which have endured minimal mutilations, i.e. as natural as possible. So whether they're undocked lambs, minimal ear tagging, organic has an extra market at that time, and even black sheep, because the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when he reenacted the Qurbani, he slaughtered black sheep. So even some people are interested in having black sheep. What does that translate into for our industry? In terms of specifications, the ideal is EUR2, not too fat, not too lean, but more towards the lean side. Our grade is acceptable as well. 1 to 3L is okay, but you want to be more towards the 1 than the 2, because at that time a leaner carcass will be quicker to cut down, the fatter carcasses, because a lot of trimming involved, will slow down the demand because we're trying to get through quite a lot of lambs at that time. But I've got here three terms just to give you a sort of help you categorize the types of animals. So I've got there a jazza, which i.e. a lamb. So that's a sexually mature lamb, over 6 months of age. Typically, from a weight perspective, it needs to be over 40 kilos live weight or over 18 kilos dead weight. 40 kilos being because from a research in the UK, the typical lamb is slaughtered around about 40 kilos. Average age is about 6.5 kilos. 6.5 months when you look across the whole season. And it's a good proxy for by what time the lambs might be sexually mature. And we know that ram lambs, for example, they do mature quicker. So the weight plus the age gives a good proxy for that. The type of lambs that could suit that: ram lambs, castrates of the same age, ewe lambs. In Southwest, early lambing season, the Dorset breeders can breed all year round, and also any of the old season lambs that are still kicking around at that time as well. The second category, before we go on to mutton, is what we term musinna. And a musinna in Arabic means that with the two teeth have come up. So in effect, this is a hogget. So it's one which is the erupted adult teeth. So typically, it's deemed to be over 12 months of old, 12 months of age. The weight criteria, that can be market dependent. It can go lighter, it can go heavier. And we don't need, because the two teeth are erupted, you don't have that same requirement for it to be a over 40 kilos. But typically it will be over 40 kilos unless there's a market demand for lighter one. Target type of animals, the two-toothers, but also your any old season hoggets, ram hoggets will fit that criteria. And the last category is obviously the mutton. Age-wise and weight-wise is all to do with the market dependent. The key thing with a mutton is a quality eligibility. So we know that a lot of cattle ewes have defects and maybe lame. So it's about trying to sort out the better quality ewes from the lower quality ones. And this is an example of a producer declaration. So we give this out. I know AHTB have been in their Qurbani booklet have been advising people as to what to say. So it's a simple declaration similar to your FCI. This is for this year just gone, and it's just saying that I declare that the lambs presented were born on or before a certain date. In last year's case is 20th of January. Should be plumb and healthy, and then we have a target weight of over 44 kilo live weight, but a minimum of 40 kilos. And you got some optional marketing opportunities along the bottom over there. Then you have your date and all the other details of traceability. I mentioned about timing. So the reason timing is so important is because Qurbani is only valid in these 3 days. So it can only commence after Eid prayers have finished on the day of Eid, and those prayers cannot itself start until after sunrise. So once you know which day is the day of Eid, the Eid al-Adha, you wait for sunrise, and then roughly around half an hour to 45 minutes after that, once the prayers are finished, is when the first Qurbani slaughter will be performed. It's religiously, the timing is absolutely critical. So if you have a Qurbani eligible animal slaughtered before the time, it's not classed as Qurbani but as normal meat. So there's a lot of pressure building up to that first day. It can take place for up to 3 days later. So from that first point up until 3 days later, and some even 4 days later. But everyone wants the order first, hence why the pressure is on the first couple of days. In terms of the size of the market, we are estimating that there's no fixed data on it, but our current estimates are between 50 to 100,000 sheep with the demand from UK, France, and Germany in particular. There is potential to increase it to 200, 350. I've gotten the slide on that. There are issues around lack of confidence because of the age of the lambs, because of where the Qurbani dates fit at the moment. And the one issue we have is that whereas mutton is easily acceptable to a lot of the British Muslims, it's not, the European consumers don't want it at all. It has to be a lamb or an all season lamb. Brexit also this year gone did hamper demand because of the costs and the delays at the border. But it's also important to remember that these data excludes the Eid market, which is the increase in the normal halal meat in the run-up to Qurbani, which has not got any eligibility requirements. Just so you know how seriously this is taken, that this is actually, we sequence in, so first slaughtering 4,000 a day, we're actually putting the people's names and saying the names at each slaughter in order and putting that tag on each carcass. So this is an example of a tag. So this is actually my one. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor here, but it's got the name. This one was given third to charity, and this is the time and the date of slaughter to give people the confidence that it was done after the right date. Excuse me. And this is where consumers now are looking for to have that confidence that how the animal is being procured and was it slaughtered at the right or other time. So this is what's being put out in the market. Excuse me. In terms of the meat distribution, the other thing to note is that every part of that Qurbani animal should be given to charity. So any income from the skin and byproducts is actually given to charity, which raises revenue for humanitarian charities. The tradition is to portion the meat into 3 parts, keep it 1 part for yourself and give another part to friends, neighbors, and extended family, and the last part is for charity. And in the UK, we've distributed through other charitable partners over 11 tons of fresh lamb and mutton meat to UK food banks and other organizations, food kitchen, etc., during Qurbani time. So the principle is that less fortunate should also share in the blessings and joy of Qurbani. I'll just speed up a little bit because I know we're running out of time. As I mentioned, the second generation do want to perform at least 1 Qurbani locally. If you were to estimate 50% of the Muslims in the UK, France, and Germany perform Qurbani in 5%, if you were just to target 5% of this market, that would equate to 367,000 over 3 days. 5% is a very small amount. 367,000 potential compared to on an average slaughter week is about 288,000. So the potential uplift for this is significant if we can match the demand. So what are the challenges for 2022? Days advancing 10 to 11 days early. The animals have to be born by the 9th of January. The age declarations to validate the status. Demand for hoggets and ram hoggets. The physical checks can validate the fact that it's a two-toother. The risk is that Qurbani becomes only a mutton job, which would undermine some lamb prices at that time and not meet the European demand. Animals can be marketed as Qurbani eligible 2 to 3 weeks prior to Qurbani Day, and these are the future dates. You can see it's coming back 10, 11 days each year. There's some resources from AHDB. There's a video and there's a better returns book there, which has a lot of detail in there. And I'll pass it back to Awal for any questions. Well, I think we're taking questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Rizwan, for such a wonderful presentation. I'm now going to move on to our next speaker, who is Dr. Gama Khan. Dr. Gama Khan represents Shazan's brand, part of One Stop Halal. They service a number of mainstream retailers with halal lamb. So without further ado, I will invite Gama to take over. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you very much for the introduction, Awal. My presentation is about British Halal challenges and opportunities. And what I'll do is I'll run through who we are, where the global market is, and generally what the opportunities are in halal and where the British halal market is, and then how that links together for the farming community. And then obviously, as Rizwan said, we'll take the questions at the end. Next slide, please. Next slide. So Shuzan's is a branded business. We started about 7-8 years ago. We're primarily in the fresh meat sector. We're also in frozen. We're also in cooked as well. And we predominantly do lamb, mutton, beef, and chicken. We started off with Tesco's a while back, and obviously we've expanded over the last 7 years to Sainsbury's, Morrison's, Asda, Aldi, and lately we're supplying M&S as part of the export to UAE. In terms of accreditations, we've got both HFA, HMC, we're Red Attractor approved. We also supply KFC. We've got 47 butchery counters, 10-15 in Morrison's and the rest in Tesco's. And so we've got a fairly broad experience in terms of what the challenges are and what sort of obstacles we face when we're trying to explore new markets and what the standards are. Next slide, please. As I just mentioned, what I'll do is I'll go through demographics, which my colleague Rizwan presented earlier. Obviously, globally, what's happening and what the challenges in the UK are. I will try and speak slowly. I'm from Newcastle, so I have a tendency to speak quickly, and you might notice some Geordie tones coming out when I say potatoes or baked, so I do apologise for that in advance. Next slide, please. The size of the opportunity. I was quite surprised actually when I look at the global opportunity and when I look at the UK. So in terms of global opportunity, you will get various stats from various bodies. So if you go to Gateway, there's lots of information. What it generally says is that the Muslim population is growing. I mean, I won't go through the detail, it's there on the slide. And that the market is worth 1.6 trillion globally. When you come to the UK, I mean, my data is from 2011, Rizwan's from 2018, but what that will tell you is that the future consumer will be Muslim and they will have a big impact on what we supply, how we supply it. Next slide, please. So I mentioned about the global opportunity. So when we look at countries like New Zealand, Australia, and the slides here, so what I'll do is I will talk generally rather than go into specifics, but quite happy to take questions afterwards. What you find is places like New Zealand, Australia, they've got infrastructures and platforms already. They're unifying their standards, which means that it's easier for people to work to, and it's easier for them to control anything coming in or going to other places. They have integrated supply chains, farm assurance, and they have regulated bodies. So when somebody says it's halal, and they can back it up. In terms of the infrastructure within the country, they all work together very well. And a good example is New Zealand. And they're supported by government. And even in countries where they aren't, there is frameworks in place and government-funded projects going on, so they can take advantage of the opportunity of the growing Muslim population and their needs going forward. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, these slides, this will tell you what Thailand's doing basically in terms of we attend a lot of the exhibitions and we also attend a lot of the seminars hosted by the various countries, and this is how we know that this is what the countries are doing. For example, you know, like the universities are backed by the government, they're putting in funding, they're establishing standards, limits. They want the infrastructure, the growing areas are being set up so that they start supplying globally when it comes to the Muslim market. Next slide, please. Malaysia, similarly, you know, go there, they're taking advantage of it. They've got their own academies. Next one, please. New Zealand. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar. Basically, New Zealand, they've got their own QA system. They've got their system set up. Again, the detail is there for you to see. I will not go into it in detail again. Next slide, please. Australia as well. Again, they've got their setup going. They are predominantly taking advantage of the export markets. For example, Fletcher's in Australia, for example, they'll be going to Indonesia, other places, because what you find is a lot of the Arabic countries and the Middle East, they're not really into lamb, sheep, and all the rest of it. So they look for other areas to actually bring in the product. Next one, please. Again, UAE. When you look at it like Saudi Arabia and UAE, they're putting in standards, bodies. They're trying to set up infrastructures because they understand this opportunity that I keep talking about. Next one, please. What's happening in the UK? In the UK, when you actually look at the overall sector, what you'll find is we have consumers, we have halal bodies, you have the standards industry bodies, academia, retailers, producers, suppliers. They all have interfaces with halal. Next slide, please. So when we talk about halal, we talk about basic principles. So when you actually look at the basic principles, they all come from the Quran. They're fairly straightforward and fairly simple. So it just essentially says that all animals are reared to strict welfare standards. I mean, there's a welfare book that we can give you a reference to. And it's interesting, when we looked at that welfare book with Compassionate World Farming, I was amazed at how similar it was to a lot of the requirements that Compassionate World Farming wants and that are in this book. The animal needs to be alive and healthy at the point of slaughter. All slaughtering is carried out by hand by a Muslim. The blade needs to be sharp. Any blood or carrion basically in there needs to be completely drained. The people are trained. The site only handles and sources the halal product to prevent cross-contamination. And all the system is approved independently by reputable halal bodies. And you have, like Rizwan mentioned, the ingredients that you can that are specifically prohibited, basically, that aren't allowed. So it's just basically a simple set of principles, when you look at halal. It's not as complicated as I think a lot of people would like you make it believe. Next slide, please. So when I talk about these basic halal principles, and you go into retail and you look at a lot of the branded supplies, like is the animal alive and healthy at the point of slaughter? Is it done by hand? Is the blood drained? This just gives you a snapshot of the marketplace. You can clearly see that it's fairly inconsistent. Next slide, please. So if there's inconsistent standards and somebody puts a halal logo on the pack, then there's an issue basically because of the market failure. It means that there's a lack in transparency and anybody can substitute the product in there under halal because there is no consistent standard. It's variable. Secondly, because you have unregulated halal bodies, for example, last time I looked in the UK, there were 14. And it varies from somebody issuing a piece of paper, which is questionable, to the other extreme, which is they've been trained, they're regulated. So there's a big variance. And because you have various halal bodies and various standards, it's confusing because when you actually go behind the halal logo on a product, there's questions that need to be asked saying it's not actually what it says on the pack. There's numerous interpretations of halal. To be honest with you, I mean, to me, it's fairly straightforward. It isn't complicated. It's very black and white, but yet there seems to be a lot of confusion. Now, because of this confusion and various standards, we have issues which I'll go into later on when it comes to increasing internal and external market opportunities. Now, all of these things are very important because if the consumption is increasing in the UK, we need to be there to have the infrastructure and everything to supply that. And if we don't have that infrastructure, then we'll have problems. And I'll go into that later on. Next slide, please. What does it mean? Next slide, please. What it means is, as I was saying, is customers don't have confidence in the halal logo. And when they don't have confidence, basically, there's an issue. Next one, please. It means, is a halal logo, is it really halal? Which is why people then move away from trusting what's generic and start going to different halal bodies. So they look for HFA or HMC, and we get questions. For example, when you look at the halal logo, it's a generic logo. Nothing underpins it. There's nothing in this country that will stop you from using a halal logo. Anybody from anywhere can put the halal logo overseas and bring it to this country and it's halal. But yeah, if I have to get halal from the UK, I have to jump through hoops to make sure that it complies, to give the customers confidence. In terms of retail itself, because you've got various standards, and when you work to a certain standard, you're limited in what you can put in retail. Because everybody has a different halal policy, there's confusion around it. And when that happens, it means that you can't put certain brands and bodies in certain retailers. And because there's various standards, it leaves the system open to adulteration, which then basically means, which I'll come on to later, it creates an unlevel playing field. So I can get lamb, UK, put it on the shelf, but yet I'm competing with a product that's come from X, Y, and Z with no substance anything, because there's nothing underpinning the halal logo that it's come under. And similarly, because there's no consistent standards, we can't actually compete overseas either, because we haven't got a consistent standard, so it's variable. So if you go to the Middle East and you say, right, I've got this standard, it's very difficult to compete because they will go on price. There's no consistency to say this is a standard that they need to be competing against, so it creates a level playing field. Next one, please. Next one. Because you have numerous standards, there's no consistency, it means sometimes you end up doing smaller production runs, which can be expensive. Also, because the standards don't exist and there's numerous ones, it means you have to set up new supply chains because they don't exist. So if I'm going to take advantage of a market or an opportunity and the infrastructure and the supply chain and the standards don't exist, then we have to go and set that up. That requires investment. But if everybody came together, it would be a lot easier. When you actually look at operational setups, there's various types of halal approval. Like I mentioned earlier, there's 14 halal bodies. It goes from a certificate to having 24/7 supervision with inspectors being on the line so they have confidence. And that again adds cost, and it creates an unlevel playing field when you compete with somebody that just issued a certificate from Poland or wherever it may be. I'm competing against that product. And again, it gives restricted products and ranges because the infrastructure and the supplies don't exist. Because we operate to our standards, we can't actually do the whole range of products which customers want. And like I said, it affects exports because we can't compete with some of the overseas people because the standards, they're not the same. Next one, please. Next one. Because standards are compromised, we can't compete because other people deliver cheaper product because the standards are different. And as usual, we're competing on a level playing field. And when you compare products, you're not comparing like for like products in retail. Just because somebody's got a halal logo is totally different to what we do in the UK. As I mentioned, uncompetitiveness. Next one. So in summary, halal faces a number of challenges, not least in those factors which undermine the true nature of halal, leading to confusion, thus undermine the confidence of consumers in the UK. I mean, I've touched on a lot of facets of the halal sector just to give a flavor. I mean, some of these areas can be discussed in detail because I've only got a 20-minute slot, please. Next one. So what's the plan in the UK? Next one. As usual, I'm just conscious of time. You know, everybody in the UK needs to come together because there's a massive opportunity, 1.6 trillion. And unless we get organized like other countries like New Zealand, Australia, Thailand, we will not be in a position to take advantage here in the UK or globally of the opportunity that exists, that's happening. Other countries are lining themselves up, but we are not. Just to give you some specific examples of what I'm talking about. For example, we sell lamb, mutton on our counters. We can't get UK beef because of the restrictions and bureaucracy on various factors to sell beef. So we have to go to Ireland for beef. Because of restrictions on lamb and mutton, we can't compete with some of the people bringing in lamb and mutton from overseas. So we are forced now that we can't actually get UK product. We have to look overseas for lamb and mutton. These are some of the challenges that we are facing. But yet our customers want British product, but the British product is expensive compared to the overseas product because the standards aren't there, which is what I was talking about. It's not a level playing field. The chain of custody isn't there. So unless these things are tackled, they will have an impact on what we're talking about. Next one, please. So what does it mean for British farming? It means that unless these things are sorted out, we need to compete on a level playing field, because if I'm going to sell lamb, mutton or beef in our counters, I need to be competitive what people are bringing in, because if the high street is bringing in beef from Europe or whatever, which is not the same standard, And because the halal logo is not being controlled or regulated, I find it very difficult to compete. And at the end of the day, Muslim consumer, whilst they want halal, they're still governed by price. It's very, very important. So therefore, it's a very difficult balancing act, which is why I was saying that if we can sort out all the standards and get together, it's easier to regulate and protect and make the product consistently and viable market. And that feeds directly into farming in the UK. And if we can sort all of that, customers have got access to UK product, you know, which is competitive, and nobody can undercut it because everything's on a level playing field. In addition to that, if we can do that, we are able to participate and recognize a global opportunity, because we can go from a uniform platform and say, this is not like for like. We offer chain of custody, we offer assurance, we offer this. That's not in place at the moment. It's fragmented. Next one, please. So all I would say is I think I've taken about 20 minutes, I hope. I hope I haven't gone overboard. And all I would do is all these things all need to be tackled to protect the halal integrity and trust for future consumers. Next one. I'm quite happy to take any questions afterwards. I think that's about 20 minutes, isn't it, I believe? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Gama Khan, for your presentation. I think I need to have further discussions with you regarding your challenges around the supply of UK beef. So we will have a chat with that, because that is a little bit concerning if you have to go abroad to get those products. So yeah, we will have a discussion on that. Thank you very much. Now I'm the next in the presentation. What we'll do is, as I said at the beginning, we will ask all questions. We'll ask all questions at the end of the presentation. So we'll have 15 minutes to ask questions. So if you have any questions, please keep them, or if you put them in the chat, Martin will extract them and then we will go through them at 8 o'clock. So demonstration of life. Many of you may have heard about a new assurance scheme that was launched by DEFRA in April 2021. And the reason for this was just to provide an assurance to the Muslim community that the method of slaughter we use for lamb is compatible with their belief system. Next slide, please, Amanda. So in terms of a background into the demonstration of life, we know that halal slaughter accounts for a significant proportion of sheep meat that is processed in the UK. Now, if you look at the regulation around the slaughter of animals, we know that WATOC, which is the welfare of animals at the time of killing 2015, that is the domestic regulation, requires that all animals are stunned before slaughter. However, there is an exemption. There is a derogation that allows Muslims and Jews to process or to slaughter animals without stunning. Despite this derogation, the majority of halal animals, or animals that are destined for the halal food chain, are actually stunned before slaughter. However, there is a key requirement there that if you are stunning an animal, the method of stunning should not kill the animal before it is bled out. And we know from research that there are some methods of stunning that will comply with this requirement. Another click, please, Amanda. So, as I said, we know there are some stunning methods, particularly head-only electrical stunning. We know it does not cause cardiac fibrillation or heart attack or cardiac arrest. So we know it will not result in the death of the animal. Now, what the Muslim community or halal meat processors want, the assurance they are looking for us to demonstrate to them that some methods of stunning, for instance, as I said, electrical head only stunning, which is mainly used for the slaughter of small ruminants in the UK, does not kill. And the only way you can do this is to stun an animal without bleeding the animal and then observe the animal for signs of life. And that is where the demonstration of life comes in. As the title suggests, you demonstrate the presence of life. You demonstrate that the animal is not dead as a consequence of the stun. If you can do this, we published a paper in Meat Science Journal in 2017 that showed that if you can demonstrate to Muslims that the method of stunning is not resulting in the death of the animal, some Muslims, and I must emphasize that some Muslims will accept that method of stunning. Next slide, please. So what is the demonstration of life then? As I said, it's an assurance tool. It's an assurance system to demonstrate to halal consumers that if an animal is stunned with electrical head-only stunning, it does not result in the death of the animal. And the scheme was launched by the welfare minister, as I said, in April 2021, and is available for processors who are looking for that secondary layer of assurance for their consumers, particularly those of you who are aiming to export your products. This is an important tool for you. So how do we demonstrate life? We demonstrate with the presence of two rhythmic breaths. The animal after stunning must be able to show two rhythmic breaths. So when that is done, the animal is then irreversibly stunned with a penetrative captive bolt stunning. But that which is captive bolted cannot then be passed to the Muslim consumer, because the majority of Muslims will not recognize or do not recognize captive bolt stunning as a halal compatible method of stunning. Next one, please. So it is not actually a novel system or assurance tool. It's actually used in countries like New Zealand. But the difference between the UK demonstration of life and New Zealand's demonstration of recovery is that whilst the UK system only demonstrates the presence of two rhythmic breaths, the New Zealand system requires full recovery of the animal. So the animal is allowed to fully recover, whilst the UK system, the animal is only required to show signs of life, signs that is not dead. And we know that rhythmic breathing, an animal that is dead cannot show rhythmic breathing. Next one, please. So the protocol for abattoirs that are interested in this is overseen by the Food Standards Agency. So it's a very simple process in the sense that if you want to participate in it, you visit the AADB website, which is www, I should have had it here, .aadb.org.uk/halal. When you get in there, you'll be able to get to the demonstration of life page. There is an application form there which you can complete. Once you complete it, we'll receive it, process it, and then forward it to the FSA. As I said, this is an important tool that we can use, or our processors, our levy payers can use to demonstrate that the methods of slaughter that they are using is consistent with halal slaughter. So it's good for both domestic consumption and also for export. Previously, it's one of the tools that countries like New Zealand have used to be able to compete better than us. So now that we have it, we are very confident that our processors can be able to demonstrate to buyers in the Middle East particularly that we have, apart from halal certification, we have a secondary layer of assurance to demonstrate that our processing complies with the halal rules. Next one, please. So that is the end of it. If you want to contact me about this or anything that we've presented today, or if you are thinking of accessing the halal market, you can drop me a line, and we've got a lot of resources within HDB that you can tap in, whether you want to, whether it's a meat education program you want, or any other resources you are looking for, we will be able to assist with that. So that is the end of my presentation. I will then introduce my colleagues, Carl Pendlebury and Martin Eccles. You know, when Rizwan was talking about the Kurbani market, two important aspects of the Kurbani market is carcass conformity and carcass fatness level. Fatness level is particularly very important. So Martin is going to talk about the difficulties that butchers encounter when they're trying to process a lot of carcasses within a short time that have got large fat cover. And Carl will talk about the farming aspects, how farmers can try to target the market with the right carcasses to be able to ensure that we increase consumer confidence in the process. So I'll hand over to Carl and Martin.
Good evening. Thank you for the invite. I will really appreciate being able to speak on this presentation. Next slide, Amanda, please. So the challenges for out of specification carcasses come in two sectors really, which is what the farmer really covers off and what it brings for the consumer. For the farmer, there's the extra cost of production. You know, this animal eats more as it gets larger. It misses the grid specification and thus missing the optimum price on returns for your better returns. It takes more management. Lambs are renowned for dying on farmers. You know, if we speak to farmers, that'll be one of the key areas really of what they tell us, is that it's really difficult, and the longer you keep them, the more risk that's out there. And reality is that it costs more to get the animal into this condition. For the consumer, it's creating waste, equaling poor value. That's a lasting memory for consumers, that lamb is expensive and wasteful. And what we actually want it to be is delicious, nutritious, and really enjoyable for them, and no polite waste. It damages the reputation of the product, which then is consumer confidence. And then the consumers are put off the repurchase, resales. The Kantar data shows us that when somebody's put off in this sort of a way, it actually takes them around 12 weeks to come back to the category and start to repurchase that product again. And then the health perception that goes around that actually then all needs to start being rebuilt and brought into a good position. Next slide, please. So what is the halal sector looking for? Well, Rizwan touched on it in his presentation, and they're looking for a mature carcass. The definition of that through this particular area is a carcass that's a minimum of 6 months old. A carcass that's free of mutilations, well, as much as possible that it can be. And if you can not do the tail docking, that would be great. Excessive tagging, management markings, anything that really shows on the carcass, or anything that shows on the lamb when it's delivered to the lairage, actually the least that you can do to it to make that as entire as possible is really the way to go with it. And it's worth remembering that as this is Kurbani, this is only a limited market for out of specification animals, you know, hence the price differentiation. You know, if you deliver a wrong animal in this particular time, there's nowhere for it to go, actually it's a really difficult product to move through the factory. It's a really difficult product for the resale, which is really why the price would be damaged so much for those non-eligible animals. And it's about farmers knowing the specification of the stock as they're going, and understanding what they can put into. Next slide, please. So what are they really looking for? And we saw that in our conventional marketing arenas, actually, the 3L part of the 3H and possibly just touching up to 4 would be an acceptable arena to sell. And what we've got in this particular time span is that number 2 is bang in the middle, Fat Class 2. Fat Class 1 is the end of Fat Class 1 is desirable, and really just into 3L as well. As you can see, that the top end of the O grade, right the way to the top of the grid, is also desirable. But realistically speaking, what they're looking for is that fat class to be as low as possible, so as that it eliminates waste, but also creates a speed and a transition through the factories. Next slide, please. I think Rizwan also touched on this, that this booklet's really great. I think that when the webinar's over, that the slide deck comes out to you, or even a recording of this, so you'll actually get the links that come out. And I would urge you to download this and just have a browse through it and refresh your memories of what the halal market's actually looking for. It's a really great booklet that can just put some pointers out for you. Next slide, please. So when it's through the factory, the cutting for the halal market is done in various ways. We do have a booklet to download again that's on the web if you would care to do that. But the requirement is the confirmation, the fat class, the assurances, as Gamma touched on, and at the point of slaughter, how to break down that carcass into main primal cuts. Next slide, please. It also covers the basics of cutting. There's also pages on the price calculations, how that's worked out, the yield guides. If you're going into this, make sure the labelling's correct, it's compliant with all the legislation, check with the trading standards and FSAs. Legal labelling's changed this year again, and it's a bit more fastidious on its requirements. And also through this, we've got the lamb cutting specifications. 2 slides on, please, Amanda. We do have lots of other assets in just another one, please. We do have lots of other assets in AHDB that you can take advantage of. We do have a red meat page, a trade page with various areas such as the lamb box schemes that's got costing calculators, cutting guides. We have recipe inspiration areas, which is with Simply Beef and Lamb. We've got farm events pages. Please do take a look at those, and we are face-to-face on farm events as well as the webinars, and yield guides, image libraries, and halal butcher guides that that you can all take advantage of. And if you'd like more information, I'm sure Martin or myself would really welcome the chance to speak to you on a one-to-one basis as well as within a group. So please do feel free to make contact with us. Next slide, please. And now we welcome any questions for any of the panelists.
I'll have some questions here. So I'll ask some questions here. I'll kick straight into them because time is just moving on a little bit. So the first one is from Alex Stevens. It says DEFRA have launched a call for views on welfare labelling, likely a precursor to a full consultation. Do you think DEFRA stroke government aspirations on labelling will be helpful or cause confusion?
Shall I take that?
Feel free.
Yeah, Brisbane.
It's I don't know if any of you have read it, but you know, it puts a fear of God in you, some of the stuff that's been put in there, because it seems like it's well intentioned from maybe a graduate coming into the scheme. The amount of detail that's gone into over there, it's very what's the word, idealistic in terms of the different supply chains and how they operate. Labeling and consumers have information as to the food they eat is really important, and in that particular call for evidence, this is to give DEFRA some insight into how this could look into a wider labeling reforms around eco-labeling and also nutritional labeling as well. The way that some of it has been worded, though, is that it puts across the impression that consumers buy on the basis of welfare. The reality is that consumers don't buy on the basis of welfare, i.e. if there's a welfare issue, they won't buy it, but they're not going to actively buy something because it's a higher welfare status. There are schemes out there like RSPC, etc., that do cater for those that want to do that, but the vast majority of people are buying on the basic elements of price and quality. It is something that we need to engage with government on to ensure that we're giving consumers information that they need, and that extra information that just confuses their purchasing decisions. So it is something that I would say is very important for people to engage with, and I know NFU will be doing quite a lot of work around this as well.
Thanks, Rizwan. There's another one now from Tony Goodger. I see that the UK is likely to begin exporting lamb to the USA. What is the opportunity for halal exports to this market? Again, probably to you, Rizwan, really that.
Yeah, there is opportunity for halal and kosher as well, and the sort of wider lamb going into the US, because there's a lot of New Zealand lamb coming into the US. There's more trends in the US with grass-fed product, hormone-free product, and I do see there'll be potential because lamb is is not consumed very much at all in the US. The Canadian market is open, and it'll be interesting to do a bit more. I know HDB have got a team over there, but lamb can't officially go over there yet. I know there's been talk about it, but I think that there will be some potential over there, but we do need to explore which areas and target our marketing spend. You know, probably sort of like in the Texas area, probably the New York area, they're probably where I see there being bigger potential.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. A question for Gamma again from Tony. Well, it's more of a comment really. You might want to pick this up with Tony a bit after this, Gamma. But he says, why can't you get UK halal beef? We have members who produce British halal beef. Happy to talk offline. So that's something I think he wants to pick up with you.
Definitely can do that, no problem. Quite happy to go into detail as to what.
Well, we have, Gamma, I'll pass you Tony's details on so we can pick up from there. And then James Taylor, excellent presentation, thank you. There's one from Colin Bateman here. Given the strict welfare and quality standards applied to halal, is it likely to expand to include sustainability factors like carbon footprint in the future?
I would have said yes, because I think most of the standards that the halal sector works to, or the brand values that we work to, will incorporate that, because that's standard retailer requirement, you know. Normally what you find is that the sustainability parameters will apply to own label, but they sort of dilute across the brands as well. So unless you meet them criteria, retailers are quite particular looking at some of these standards and saying, are you going to comply? So as an organization, we are working 2050 guidelines basically at the moment in terms of CO2.
Okay. Sorry, go on, Rizwan, sorry.
I was just going to add to that. When we have attended a lot of the Muslim consumer events, and we've done our own surveys there with the iPad just to get an idea of what the young Muslim consumer is thinking. Because Muslim consumers are very young, and a lot of the young people are very influenced by climate. So we're seeing that question more and more. So I do see it's being a key purchasing driver. I think that particularly for grass-fed British lamb, we've got a great story to tell around that.
And also, I think there's a perception out there that because it's halal, it's a different supply chain. It is not a different supply chain. It is the same supply chain, basically. It just means that it's differentiated with certain characteristics within the processing sector. Otherwise, supply chains are identical to own label product or anything else. So they all come from British farms. Or the only challenge is when you have product coming in from overseas and they're not being built to standards or an intensive system and it's not regulated. That's where you get challenges, where products coming in under the guise of halal and being sold in high streets and places like that, which is where it's undermined. That's where the challenge is.
Yeah, I think that leads into the next question really as well from Alex Stevens again. It says, how much product for the halal market is purchased through livestock markets? Is your preference for sales direct to the slaughter, Rizvan, or are you looking for a direct purchase from farmers under contract at all?
Yeah, it's a good question. Typically because we're mainly on the export side, and a lot of factors influence the demand on the European market. So we do tend to buy largely from the livestock markets because it depends on the supply and demand situation and the price situation to how much trade can be done. So in our plant, in the low season, we could be as low as 78,000 in the week. When the high season, we're 25,000 in the week. So it doesn't. We do have some direct buyers, direct buying near our location, but they tend to be the contracted ones tend to be with the supermarkets. I do see there being potential for that going forward, but particularly with the newer generation and working with the likes of Shazams, etc. But it is we're not there quite yet from our business anyway.
Okay, that's it really. There's a couple of other questions that I will pass on to the panelists, but we are just running a bit short on time. I know I'm under strict orders to finish at 8:13. So thank you very much for your questions.
Yeah, Martin, how many questions do we have more? How many more questions do we have?
There's a couple of questions, Al, but the ones we can take offline.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah. Once again, thank you everyone for being with us tonight. To the panelists, I would like to wholeheartedly thank you for your time. To my colleagues Martin and Carl, thank you very much for agreeing to be part of this conversation. Phil Hadley Phil Hadley of AG has commented on the value of the US export over the first 5 years. I think I mentioned it in my presentation. Is estimated to be worth £37 million. So that is a significant market, which AG is very close to opening to our processes. So that is something very, very important and also very good to be proud of. So we've come to the end of it. I would like to thank you once again for staying with us as one of the finest chairmen in the meat industry. I've finished at the right time. I've actually got 1 minute to spare, so I'm gonna spare you guys 1 minute of your life. So thank you once again, and we look forward to meeting you again in future webinars or face-to-face to continue to discuss the opportunities that the halal sector presents to us. So thank you.